So what you're saying about sort of Western personality, person, character driven narrative, we see a lot of the arc of an episode being about what changed, who changed, like how did this change the protagonist, what did the protagonist achieve. When you look at this episode, who changed really? Like Ginko's still continuing to do exactly what he's been doing. Biki's still pretty much in the same place. He's still friends with Sui. Like it's not like he had any grand epiphany. He saw the stream for a while, but then kind of back to things. Sui, while yes, she gained an eye and vision, has she really changed? I think she's kind of gonna, continue the way she was. She wasn't really that depressed in the beginning. She just got sad because something happened. And mom, obviously, we don't see anything change about her. She might have, but we don't know. And it's not part of the story. It's just character growth is almost always ambiguous. And that's kind of the point. I've heard criticisms of Mushi-Shi saying that there's no character development. That's kind of the point, is that we're not observing, we're not trying to empathize with these characters and sort of finding success and validation. We're watching them almost as if we're scientists and we're observing behavior in one slice of time. Is there a change? Is there not? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. That's kind of the point. That's what we're looking for. Yeah. And I think that's cool.
It's the Mushi's world, and we're just living in it.
We're just living in it.
I love it. No, I tell you what, that segues into the story that I want to tell. And it's this idea of creating a narrative context where you can decenter our unconscious assumptions about what people are, about what a story is supposed to do. And then if you can stay in it, because I suspect some people can't, right? If you can stay in it, you get put in a state that you can't get into often by yourself. It's almost like listening to good jazz, right? It just puts you in a state that you can't do by yourself, because we're living our lives as human beings, living in that rhetoric, living in that way of thinking all the time. So it's very difficult for us to think about life in a decentered way, particularly in the heat of the moment. So the episode I chose was The Cotton Changeling. This episode actually came pretty late in the series. And it's the one that I found just did the job of decentering our notions of humanity most effectively, because it was done very visually from moment to moment. And it was also the one that just had the most continuous, abrupt, I'm going to say plot shifts, but narrative reorganizations for the viewer, at least for me. So the episode starts out with Ginko speaking with a wife and a husband, and their eldest child is fallen ill. He has these green blotches all over his body. And the wife tells Ginko that the night of my wedding in a forest, on my way home, I noticed a dark green spot on my kimono. I thought it might be a bad omen. And I didn't really think about it again until my eldest son started showing these green spots. And then Ginko just comes out and says, was the child born in human form? And the parents are just stunned, because of course this is the first thing they should have told him. The woman has a second child that she clutches very closely to her in response to Ginko's question. And then she says, he wasn't even a beast. He was a strange green mass that crawled, after being born, crawled underneath the house. The husband grabs his sword and tries to catch it, but it gets underneath the house before he can find it. And then about a year later, they're both sleeping at night and they hear sounds coming from beneath the house in the middle of the night. So the husband takes a lantern, and the visuals are so great. You just see the light of a lantern exposing what it can underneath the porch, and there's a little baby there. So the husband takes it to the house. He takes it into the house, shows it to the wife, and says, oh, maybe it's lost. Somebody left it here. The wife says, no, this is our child, and he's finally converted to human form. So what I love about that mom line is that, yeah, she knows this thing wasn't born as a human being. She doesn't care. It's of her, it's her child, and she's fully consciously aware that it has now become her kid. And the kid grows fast. It's not very intelligent. The parents describing it as having the mind of an infant. But regardless, they both become attached. And then months later, the husband wakes up in the middle of the night and he hears more sounds under the house. And he goes to look and there's another kid. So it turns out that one of these new kids, I'm going to use the word sprouts, of about every half year. And then after the 3 years, that's when the eldest started developing the green spots, became weaker and weaker with more spots. So what Ginko tells him is, well, what's happened is that your eldest has reached the end of his lifespan. He's a type of mushi called watahaki. And what it does is it looks for pregnant women and it becomes parasitic on the ovum. It's a green cotton seed that sort of floats through the air. It's born as a slime and it sends these human forms back to the parents for nutrients and to keep itself alive. So Ginko, he looks under the house just to see if his theory is correct. And what you see in the animation is just, it looks like a top of a pond. Of course, the husband can't see it. And the husband says, how do you know that there are mushi under there? And Ginko just grabs a pile of dirt and puts it in his hand and says, just watch this. And light hits the dirt and it just kind of animates in the way only anime can do. And it just gives us these movement dynamics that we don't know how to process. Right. And that's what gives it this abject otherness. It's a movement that we can get some of, but none of it comes together as a moving organism or a moving thing. It's just moving life. And so it turns out that the children, which are called hitotaki, are connected to the watahaki by these thin threads that we can't see. And they're all part of the wataki. And what they do is they go out into the world and they basically send nutrients back to the wataki under the house. But when they die, as the eldest is about to do, they end up coughing up seeds. So the Ginko just says, we have to kill it before then. I mean, there's just no hesitation in how he's thinking about this. There's absolutely no ambiguity about what he's telling the parents. And the mother says, why don't you just save him from the mushi? And he says, well, there's no kid to save. This mushi has basically been wearing the skin of a child, and they killed the child that was supposed to be born. So Ginko actually pulls out a syringe and injects the eldest with poison. And then you see Ginko and the father outdoors burning the body. I mean, this is just pretty brutal stuff, but it doesn't come across with, trumpets blaring and synthesizers doing weird music. It's just, this is what happened in this life, given what things are. The wife still wants to keep the other children. So the husband promises to kill them as soon as they start developing green spots. And Ginko says, well, they can live up to 30 years. Are you okay with the idea of killing them? And you said you were scared of them. Well, why would you even want to keep them? And he says, to keep my wife happy. She had a first marriage, had a kid. The kid died in a year. So her husband divorced her. So we'll talk about that later, but I love what they do with human love and what it means in the middle of this very bizarre space they created. So Ginko gives him a poison and says, I have to leave. So call me if need be, and I trust you to do what you have to do. Well, 3 months later, the husband reaches out to him again. Ginko arrives. And the babies are now communicating with each other through words. And the baby tells the mom, he's coming to kill us. Ginko walks to the house, and as the wife bows to greet him, she actually thrusts toward him and stabs him. So the husband locks the wife in a room. Ginko's out in the other room, bandaged, healing. And the father informs him that the babies are getting smarter, they're using language, and the new ones are basically absorbing and expressing the things that the older ones have learned. And they're basically sharing the information, the lived lives of 5 different people. And Ginko says no. What they are is a fungus that thinks. And I just love, I don't know if that's the English translation, but I love the brutality of taking those few number of words and Just no, they're a fungus that thinks. They talk to each other. They know they're going to die, right? So they decide they have to save the seeds, but they can't remember how to. So what happens is you see this very quiet scene with one of the kids going through Ginko's manuscripts. There's no explanation. The kid's just going through Ginko's manuscripts. Ginko's planning to exterminate the second son, cut the roots from the others, and take them with him. So Ginko goes into the kid's room, and the kid says, "I don't want to die." And then the dialogue here is just incredible. "I don't want to die, but you have to. You eat human children. It's not our fault. It's not our fault either, but we're stronger. That's why you're going to die without leaving seeds." And I'll just come to that exchange later because it's clear-eyed, beautiful. And then the kid communicates with the others to start burning the house. The kid tells Ginko, "It's the only way we can save our seeds. We usually could have done this unconsciously, but it was written in the scrolls that you brought, so I figured out how to save ourselves." So the mom tries to save the kid. She enters the bedroom. All four of the kids are in the burning bedroom, and then they start to morph in the fire as if they're sort of melting. And then it looks like they burst into vapor, they burst into seeds. We're just not sure. They just kind of burst into what looks like smoker seeds. Then we see Ginko looking under the house for something, and he meets the parents, and he tells them the Mushi, they sense the danger, but what it does is it cuts its connection with the kids in order to let them escape, and then those kids go into hibernation. So then he hands the parents this green knobby seed about the size of a golf ball. And Ginko says, "I don't know when it might come back to life. It could do so after you die." And then he leaves them. And they get rather emotional. They say, "We'll carry it with us always." And they're very grateful. Then later, Ginko's walking through the forest, and a voice asks him what he gave them. And Ginko said, "I gave them a mineral." And the voice says, "Why'd you do that? You're certainly a mysterious creature." And Ginko says, "Look who's talking." And he pulls out a jar containing this green liquid. "Aren't you supposed to be hibernating?" And then this green liquid says, "I'm not even tired." And then a face suddenly materializes in the liquid, as only anime can do. And it says, "Why aren't you killing us now that you can?" And then Ginko says, "Because your life hasn't ended." And then the voice says, "You're certainly a strange creature." And Ginko says, "Shut up and go to sleep." And that's the end of the story. And for me, it was just twist, turn, twist, turn, twist, turn. And just even that little, "your life isn't over yet." It could have been. I mean, that was the point. And that's, with an agentic driven narrative, you kind of feel, the hero's got the bad guy. Now he's going to kill him, right? And but Ginko knows the world differently. And I don't know if he knows the world differently. And so he's being himself, not killing this thing. And it's just so decentering, right? It's so directly contrasts, challenges our sort of traditional humanistic narratives. And I'll just stop there and see what comments you guys might have. But I absolutely love that episode.
Oh man, it's such a loaded episode and it's so good. Yeah, this is one of the episodes that you're really thrust into this, well, I shouldn't say you get to observe this moral conundrum, this quandary. Although I think that ultimately you could reach the conclusion that these things are killing humans, we should kill them, whatever it is. But I think with Ginko, we always come back to this sense of balance. There's a quiet balance to the world that should be maintained. Now we find out later with a lot of other Mushi-Shi, what they do, they pretty much exterminate Mushi. They're Mushi fighters. If this was a different anime, we'd follow one of them and they'd be vanquishing and exercising Mushis left and right, which they do in the world that exists in the world of Mushi-Shi. But so the way that Ginko is unique is that he tends to find a way for them to sort of return to their natural state, and he tries to teach the humans, hey, this is how you exist with them don't kill them. We shouldn't kill them. There's a way to exist. They are nature incarnate. You need to find a way to exist with them, even if that's, not good for your health. And almost inevitably people don't do it. they just can't.
Yeah.
They take too much or too little of the medicine he gave them. They do the thing he tells them expressly not to do. But the thing, to return to the point, is that Ginko always will find a sort of solution that is not ending the life of Mushi, but rather to like return to the balance. And that's what we talked about earlier, about like finding the balance, the harmony, the collective, all parts of a whole. And even in the light in the eyelids, the liquid Mushi lives on. And just like in this one, like the liquid spore lives on. He finds a way to do that, which is always kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, we know what happened when the Mushi like move on from a place, right? Like catastrophe happens because there's no longer the essence of life there. So it's going to be a flood. It's going to be a volcano erupting.
Famine.
Mushi leaves. Yeah. It's not going to go well for the humans, and Ginko knows that, right? So that it is the cool part of the story, because you kind of get clued into this, and really it might only be Ginko that truly understands that, because I think that he's gone through that transformation, eyes unclouded, right? Right? His eyes unclouded, because because his kind of humanness was almost erased. He kind of came to be through a blank slate, through the Mushi point of view, right? So he's still very much an advocate for human life prospering, but he also just lives and understands the reality of the Mushi. So that's a cool thing.
And isn't it such great dramatic irony that we know what happened to Ginko, his origin story? We know of Nui, we know about what Ginko actually is, and the Ginko that we know does not. He doesn't remember anything from before the transformation.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so we have to live with the burden of knowing that Ginko's probably going to be consumed by Tokoyami someday. He doesn't know why, he doesn't know when, but it's gonna happen. And it's just another great use of a storytelling technique that we just don't see often enough, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. One of the things as I listen to you guys talk, something I think about more and more is, I talked a little earlier, the curse of language. Because as soon as we create words that are like cognitive objects, and then we put them together and they're always driven by a worldview, and that is inescapable, right? You cannot use words without a worldview. So as you put that worldview out there, you're obviously not talking about everything. They're emerging out of everything that, but the words are pointing to things that they're not pointing to, because they're actually better. But Ginko seems to live in this space that is aware of the curse of words, aware of the curse of thinking the world is one thing when knowing the world is everything, and just walking in that space and recognizing over time, man, all I can do is try to manage this and maybe reduce some suffering here and there. But there's no heaven to go to. That's not what we're doing here, right? There's no salvation to seek. There is only being, B-E-I-N-G. And if that's what it is, then, then we get into the things Tatsu talked about earlier, then joyfully embrace the sorrow that is life. And instead of generating rhetorical systems that basically allow you to ignore everybody's suffering, because the rhetorical system itself is created to avoid all that suffering. So to put that in a character, embody it for 26 episodes and have it to play out the way it is, it's a fantastic way to describe the undescribable. And just to throw you in the midst of it, I gotta tell you though, that little teeny exchange, I don't want to die, but you have to, you eat children. It's not our fault. No, let me say that. The kid says, I don't want to die. Ginko says, but you have to, you eat children. Ginko, and the kid says, it's not our fault. And then Ginko says, it's not our fault either, but we're stronger. And that's why you're going to die before you can send out seeds. What I love about that is that it's unabashed, honest explanation of power, which underlies everything we do, while we simultaneously generate these rhetorical systems that make our use of power moral, right? So that by making our use of power moral in ways that destroy other agents, what we're able to do is disregard the suffering of the agents we've destroyed, because that dissonance is basically converted for us into, but we're moral. We're descendants of this or that. We have a moral crusade. Ginko doesn't do that. You're done. And you're done because you're a threat to this. And there's no moral explanation here. It's just a total description of power. And for me, I believe that's what reality is. And forces, interacting forces working to sustain themselves, and necessarily unable to escape everything. So in order to deal with the brutality humans often have to mete out, they wrap it in this moral message that basically affords them the opportunity to avoid the suffering that they're creating. And I thought, boom, 3 sentences. Wow, I got to teach a class on this show at some point.
There you go.
I just
love
this
seminar.
It is so strange that something like Mushi, this fictional entity, something that can't be described through science or described through spirituality. It's something in between, and yet it is the lens through which we are able to sort of observe humanity at its basest form, at like unsubjective, completely objective sort of, without moral sort of overlay on it. It's strange. It gets it, you know.
Well, if someday some Mushi might come back to Ginko and say, we have more power now, and you're done. I mean,
it's the balance.
Exactly.
And there's something that Nui says in the episode that you talked about, Tatsu, the one-eyed fish, and it is something to the effect of it is what it is. Everything is as it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the message here, is that things are, period.
Bam.
You know?
Yep.
all things serve a larger purpose, you know?
Yeah. So let me ask you guys sort of a cross-cultural question through your own experiences. You said you both were raised in Japan early on in your life. Is there your own experiences? Is there something this show speaks to that makes you feel on a cultural edge, where you're kind of Ginko-ish, and there are things you can't explain to people in one culture about your culture? I didn't plan on asking that question, but the context sort of demanded it. Did you all the things you're talking about in terms of Japanese culture, did you have that in your world of experience? And then when you came here, it's a different space, and you know, you've got one eye and white hair, and you're trying to tell people.
That's an excellent question, and I would start the conversation with sort of where I am now, which is I do a lot of translation work, and I watch a lot of anime, and I read a lot of fantasy, and I love both, and there are things that just don't translate. it's impossible, especially in the context of an anime and subtitles. Those two lines cannot express, even with the little supplemental sometimes on the top of the screen. There's no way to describe subtext and culture and history and psychology over a translation. And it's just the most frustrating thing. Which leads me to recommend watching Mushi-Shi, even if you have watched the dub, which is not that bad for D&D fans like myself. Travis, and his last name escapes me at the moment, known from Critical Role, a show, does the dub and does a very good job. Travis Willingham. But this is just a deeply Japanese, I think, show. So I highly recommend watching it in Japanese, because you will get, at least with intonation, some of the intention. And yeah, Tatsu, I think I might pose this question to you, which is that, like, what were the conflicts of a Japanese understanding of the world and then coming to America and experiencing everything where everyone has a completely different context of life and existence, and here you are thrust into that, and how that is. You know, I know how sort of my experience went, but I'm curious to know how it was for you.
Yeah, it's a strange experience, because you grow up in a culture where you're constantly thinking about what other people, you know, are going to think about you if you do it in a certain way. Whether you're, you know, the kind of like the ideal, like, moral person, or you're the prankster, you still kind of have this kind of like inert sense of like, I'm doing something the way I do it because I'm going to be viewed in a certain way. And you're always thinking about the consequences of your actions, right? What are the consequences of my actions? So it's so deeply ingrained. Something like, you know, not disturbing your neighbors with your noise. It's so deeply ingrained that it scales up to something like, you know, when we visited Japan the last time, we saw, you know, construction sites where they literally have like a sound barrier built around it, like in scaffolding, so they can dampen the noise of the construction.
Wow.
You know, that's something that you would absolutely never see in the States or any other Western country, probably. You know, and so, you know, for a child, you know, I was 10, 11 years old when I came over, to be kind of thrust into this society where it's kind of like you go out and get like for your own, you know. It was hard. It was a hard transition, you know. I was also having to learn how to read and write in the language as well, because, you know, I grew up speaking English, but never really learned how to read and write during elementary school. So it was tough. It was definitely tough. But the cool thing about like being cross-cultural is that you learn how to adapt, and you kind of a lot like the Mushi in a way, because or like a lot like being able to read the Mushi in a way, because you see these different contexts and you're able to kind of immerse yourself into it and learn and be. You're the cotton changeling, you know. So that's kind of my experience, is that you know, you view the world in a more kind of multifaceted way.
I love it. This is why, you know, I mean, not everybody's looking for that worldview, and people who've been raised in a space and never really feel like they fit and they come to me and they talk about it, my first thing is, well, travel as much as you can, right? See something different. And as you see more and more difference, you can find where the thing called you might fall in there. And, and then to be honest, at my age now, I'm not so terribly uptight about being someone specific. I let different aspects of who you are be amplified in different contexts. My experience has been, I'll be honest, particularly in psychology, there's this real rational commitment to being a coherent, self-knowing identity who's self-actualized. And it just always ends up feeling like she doth protest too much, right? It's just the more you scream, I am someone, the more it means you're everything. And just the denial of not being sure of who you are. It's very intense. And so it's an absolute pleasure for me it's one of the reasons I reached out to anime, man. I just always looking for something that's a different story. And, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Cowboy Bebop, I found that difference. But damn, man, I found this story and it was the most challenging, it was the most decentering story I had seen at that point in my life. And the story is actually the Cotton Changeling story. I went on to actually be made into a movie. It's not Mushi-Shi, it's not the Cotton Changeling, but it's a British zombie flick called The Girl with All the Gifts. And it is stunningly well done. And I think it is the final statement on what zombie movies are. And my friend, Dr. Stanford Carpenter, turned me on to it. And I stole his words when I say it's the last zombie movie, because it does for us what the Cotton Changeling does for us. It just makes us, it allows us to look at ourselves outside of our own perspective a bit while still trapped in it. Anyway, I want to shut up. I absolutely love the show. I so much enjoy talking to you two about these things. I very much appreciate you you indulging my questions about your cultural experiences. You shared a bit and I appreciate it. Is there anything else about the show that you'd like to share before we sign off?
When I was preparing for this, I was thinking about watching it backwards, because I watched it through several times and I've started it a lot. And so I thought I was thinking whether it holds up watching it backwards, which it does if you're somebody that watched it a lot. But then as I started it with Grace again, I'm like, well, you have to see those first few episodes to really be clued in.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of tough. But at the same time, I don't think that you're going to be too lost if you're kind of like dropped into an episode, which is also a great thing about this show. It's a collection of short stories.
Yeah, it's an anthology series, very much so, in that you can watch them almost completely out of chronological order, and it doesn't matter. You can just jump into an episode. And
it's so unabashedly is what it is. It doesn't ask for your forgiveness. It doesn't ask for your acceptance. It just boom, boom, boom. Now, of course, someone had to accept it to pay for it, and we all know that's there, but just bold storytelling. Yeah.
So at the end of every episode, we get the voice of Nui sort of just reading the title of the next episode. It's almost like turning a page in a chapter and coming up next, as opposed to the big splashy like previews that you get with most anime next week on Dragon Ball Z. And the very last episode of the first season, which ended in 2006, and the next season didn't really come about until 2014. So this could have been the end of the show, and that would have been fine as well. Right. We're very glad that it wasn't. But at the end, Nui says, "Kono yo wa hitoshirennu seimei ni afurete iru." And the translation that I had on the version that I watched says, "The world is filled with life unknown to man." I think that more correctly, the line is, "Our world is bursting with life unknowable to us." unknowable to man, to
Yeah.
people. And I think that sort of really hit me in that it's sort of saying, and I think that this is sort of the message of the show as a whole, is that, you know, continue to observe. The world is brimming with life. If only you sit and watch. And it is unknowable to us, but that just means there's forever things to learn ad infinitum. Yeah, you know, that you know, just maybe shut up and listen and watch, observe, and you'll see that there is an endless flow of life that we can observe in this short span of time that we call life.
No, that's fantastic. And the two translations, they center different things. So the first one is, you know, there are things out there that are unknowable to humans, right? So there are things, they're out there, and they're unknowable to us. So the whole thing doesn't even, it divides the two. We're not part of anything. At least that's not what's being emphasized. And in the translation you gave, what we're in is bursting with stuff we don't know. So automatically, if we're centered, we're not centered in a vacuum. We're centered in a space that we're part of. And it's got all kinds of stuff that goes on that it's not even so much about knowing. It's about be a different way, and difference will make its way into your life. I absolutely love it. So that about, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna add like another bit on translation is the intro, like before the song, before or after the song. Typically at the beginning of the episode they have a bit about explaining what the Mushi are, right? The translation there also does not do it justice at all. And this is why you should listen to it in Japanese. It's the way the voice actor says those lines. It's like a curse. It really is. It is haunting. And so every episode you're clued into, you are cursed, and all you can do is live in a way to live within this curse. And so that's
life
just
is a
another
curse.
life is a curse.
Yeah, that's fantastic. If we could, as Tatsu knows, I could talk about curse all day.
Oh yeah, let's not get into Mononoke today.
Exactly. So gentlemen, that about wraps it up. Thanks so much for this wonderful conversation about this fantastic show. Please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we shall start with Rio.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram as I Know Rio. I'm sure if you Google searched me, you'll find my YouTube channel. I don't post anything, but you could ask me questions on any of those things, including the thing that I mentioned earlier about the color theme of each episode. Rewatchability check there. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks. Excellent. Thank you so much. How about you, Tatsu?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Tatsushi1892.
Fantastic. I'm on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of Dark Loops, Why Is This So Good? On YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions channel. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it on this YouTube page or send an email to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs, and remember, Mushi-Shi is life.
Mushi is life.
Mushi is life.